All right. So we're diving into this whole "it ain't over yet" thing. And you know that feeling, right? When you've done absolutely everything you can, but the problem's like still staring you right in the face.
It's the worst.
It's like, come on already.
Yeah.
Well, Pastor Dave really got into this feeling in part 2 of his sermon series. And I gotta say, this story totally hooked me right from the beginning.
Yeah, it's powerful.
So let's set the scene.
Okay.
We're talking ancient times, small town. You're a single mom just trying to make ends meet, which is hard enough as it is.
Right.
But then, bam, drought hits.
Oh, man.
Food prices go through the roof and you're down to rationing the last scraps for you and your kid. Talk about a bleak situation.
Absolutely. And this is where I think Pastor Dave really brings it home. You've got this widow facing impossible odds, and then she runs into Elijah. Now, Elijah himself is no stranger to hard times. He's on the run, totally reliant on God for everything.
So you've got these two people, both in incredibly tough spots, brought together in this one moment. What happens?
Well, Elijah does something pretty bold. He basically says, hey, can you make me some food?
Hold on. He asks this woman who's practically down to her last grain of rice to whip him up a meal.
It seems crazy, right? But think about it. Elijah's fleeing for his life, yet he's choosing to trust that God will provide even when it seems impossible. It's that unshakable faith that makes the miracle possible.
Okay, but let's be real for a second. If you're that widow, you're thinking, seriously? You want me to share the only food I have with a total stranger? But her response, man, it gets me every time.
It's incredible, isn't it? In that moment of pure desperation, she chooses to trust God. She puts Elijah's needs before her own, even though it makes absolutely no logical sense.
It's like saying, okay, God, I'm putting this in your hands.
Exactly. And it's that surrender that opens the door for God to work.
And Pastor Dave had this great line in his sermon. He said, sometimes the greatest act of faith is not understanding how, but simply saying yes.
Yes. And that's exactly what she does. She takes this huge leap of faith, and in doing so, opens the door for God to move.
It's like that old saying, God helps those who help themselves, but maybe with a little twist of God helps those who help others even when they're struggling themselves.
Right. And it's not just some nice story from the Bible. It's a principle that applies today. Think about tithing, giving a portion of what you have when you feel like you're barely scraping by.
It seems counterintuitive.
It does. But for a lot of people, it's been proof that God will provide when we put him first.
It's like saying, okay, God, I'm trusting you with this, even though I have no idea how it's going to work out. And that's where this story takes a turn, because you might think, all right, she shared her last meal. God's going to magically refill her pantry, right? But life, it's not always that simple.
You got that right. Life rarely goes according to plan.
And this story, well, let's just say it throws a curveball that I think a lot of us can relate to, even if we don't always want to admit it. So it seems like maybe, just maybe, things are looking up for this widow. And then, bam, life throws her the worst possible curveball. Her son, the one she's fighting so hard for, he gets incredibly sick. It's heartbreaking. You can just feel her world falling apart. And in that moment of just pure grief, she turns to Elijah, and her words are so raw, so honest. She says, what have I to do with you, you man of God? Have you come to bring my sin to remembrance and to cause the death of my son?
Wow. It's like that question we probably wouldn't want to admit we ask,
Yeah.
but deep down when tragedy strikes, who hasn't felt that way?
Yeah.
That why me, that why now, that maybe God's punishing us or something.
It's a natural human response to pain and loss. And Pastor Dave reminds us that even people of great faith like Elijah, they wrestled with doubt too. But here's where Pastor Dave takes it a step further. He talks about Jennifer Sands, who lost her husband in the 9/11 attacks.
Yeah, Jennifer said that after the attacks, her anger wasn't directed at the terrorists. It was directed at God. Can you imagine that? To face such incredible loss and be angry not at the people who caused it, but at God.
It's like a whole other level of pain.
It is. And it shows that even in our darkest moments, even when we're at our breaking point, we're still in this dialogue with God.
We're still trying to make sense of it all.
Exactly. And what I find fascinating is that Pastor Dave doesn't shy away from these tough emotions. He actually encourages us to reframe those why questions. Instead of asking, why me or why now? What if we ask, what are you preparing me for? Or what can I learn from this?
It's like completely changing the way we look at these situations.
It is. Instead of seeing hardship as punishment, we start to look for the opportunity to lessen the way through.
It's like flipping the script.
Exactly. And that's where the timing of this story is so important. Because even Elijah, a prophet who had witnessed God's power firsthand, he grappled with doubt too. He even questioned God's plan, wondering why this tragedy had to happen.
So even Elijah had his moments.
We all do. But there's something about the way both the widow and Elijah respond in this crisis that I find really profound.
What's that?
They both could have easily turned away from God in their grief and anger, but they don't. Instead, they keep turning to him, crying out to him, pleading for his help. Like they understand that even in the midst of questioning and doubting, their connection with God is their lifeline.
It's about holding on to that thread of faith even when everything else feels like it's falling apart.
Yes.
Exactly. It's about recognizing that it's okay to not have all the answers, to wrestle with doubt, to even feel angry with God. What matters is that we don't let those feelings sever our connection with him. We keep that line of communication open even when we don't understand what he's doing.
Because at the end of the day, isn't that what faith is all about? Trusting in God's goodness and love, even when we can't see the path ahead, even when we're surrounded by darkness and doubt.
Absolutely. And this story, it doesn't leave us hanging in that uncertainty. Remember, it's called It Ain't Over Yet. And that's exactly what happens next.
So here we are, right? Everything seems completely hopeless. The widow's world has been turned upside down. Elijah's questioning God's plan, and this child is gone.
It's like the ultimate test of faith.
Right. It'd be so easy to just give up. Absolutely. But this is where we see the true power of it ain't over yet. Elijah, even with his own doubts, he gets down on his knees and prays for this boy.
He's begging God to step in to bring this child back to life.
Exactly. And it's not just a quiet whisper of a prayer. He's pouring out his heart, pleading for a miracle.
And what gets me is even in his prayer, he acknowledges that ultimately it's all in God's hands.
It's like he's saying, God, I don't get it. I don't understand why this is happening, but I trust you to make it right.
And that's really what it comes down to, doesn't it? Recognizing that even when we're lost and confused, God is still there.
He's still listening.
Mm-hmm.
He still cares. And sometimes his answer, well, it comes in the form of a miracle.
Because that's what happens next. The child takes a breath, color comes back to his face, and the impossible becomes reality.
It's incredible. It shows that God's power has no limits.
Mm-hmm. It's like all those times we question why things happen the way they do. Maybe those are the moments that are actually setting us up for something amazing.
That's so true. It's about shifting our perspective.
Right.
Instead of asking, why is this happening to me? We ask, what is God trying to do in me and through me?
It's about trusting that God's got a bigger plan that we can't always see.
Exactly. And that sometimes our biggest challenges lead to our greatest blessings.
This whole idea of trusting God when you've done all you can, that's where the real transformation happens. Letting go of our need to understand, to control, and just saying, okay, God, I trust you.
Because that's when we open ourselves up to experiencing those miracles in our own lives.
So if you're listening and you're going through a tough time right now, feeling stuck, remember this story. Remember the widow who chose to trust even when it didn't make sense. Remember Elijah who questioned but never stopped believing. And remember that child brought back to life. It's a reminder that no matter what, it ain't over yet. God's still working and he hasn't forgotten about you.